Was there any suspicion or speculation about Nixon in the press during elections? And what do you think drew Americans to vote for him in the first place?
I didn't hear the last part of the question.
What do you think drew Americans in to vote for him in the first place?
Well, 50% of the public, the American people, are generally Democrats, and slightly less than 50% of the people are Republicans. Although now there's probably 20% of the people are independents. But back 30 or so years ago, the two parties were almost evenly weighted. So half the people were going to vote for Nixon and half the people were going to vote for Humphrey or whoever ran against Nixon. Humphrey ran against Nixon the first time, and then the second time McGovern ran against Nixon. But Nixon had done a very good job the first term and looked almost to be a certainty to be reelected. And for that reason, it was a big surprise to a lot of people that Watergate even became an issue. And in point of fact, before the election, it was successfully deflected by the committee to re-elect the president and efforts by the wacko liberal press to castigate Nixon and to investigate the thing had all proved to be to go nowhere. So it wasn't until after the election that the Watergate, the reporters for the Washington Post started making headway in Bernstein and the other guy, I can't remember his name. Anyway, they started making headway into the cover-up and what was going on, as did this federal judge who had no reason to do so, but took it upon himself to become a prosecutor as well as a judge. And when the guys who all were arrested for the Watergate burglary came in, all these Cubans that were involved, he said he couldn't believe that they took it upon himself to suddenly break into the Democrat National Committee headquarters. And of course that was correct, because E. Howard Hunt, who was a former CIA guy, was providing a couple $100,000 of money to keep everything quiet. And I don't know if the name G. Gordon Liddy stands out for someone your age, but he was one of these guys who was a complete right-wing nut and who was willing to take the bullet, and I mean that literally, to have, to be shot so that he wouldn't spill the beans on any of what had gone on. But as matters began to unfold, and then it was learned that Nixon had tapes of everything that went on in the Oval Office, and he was unsuccessful in saying that these tapes involved national security, and he wasn't going to turn them over, and stupidly held on to them instead of throwing them into the Potomac, or saying, oh, I've ordered them all destroyed, and ha ha ha, now try to impeach me. He, for some reason, got some really, really bad advice, or followed his own really, really bad advice, and held on to the tapes. And of course, once the tapes became public, it was pretty clear that a lot of stuff was going on that didn't meet the public's eye.
So what was the atmosphere of the country when they found out about the Watergate burglary?
Well, as I said, then there was almost no reaction. But in the summer that led to the start of the impeachment proceedings against Nixon, the country was in absolute fever pitch, and because nothing like this had ever taken place since 1868 when Andrew Johnson got impeached, and as old as I am, I wasn't there at that time. And the many people, myself included, thought that the committee to impeach the president was stacked with some really mean-spirited people who wanted to destroy the president. But by this juncture, he had pretty well destroyed himself, and when the tapes came out, it was all over, and he was forced to resign. But it was extraordinary, and then the country was absolutely mesmerized by the entire thing. It was on the news all day long, all night long. Just incredible tension and the determination of the press to vilify and they were so happy that they were going to get Nixon. They just couldn't get enough of how wonderfully happy they were that they were going to destroy this man.
Were you for or against the impeachment of Nixon?
I was against the impeachment of Nixon, but by the time it was all over, well, he wasn't impeached.
What did you want? Like
he
at first?
he resigned because he realized that if the trial was I take that back. He was impeached. The impeachment was done by the House of Representatives, who found that he had committed 3 of the 5 charges that they leveled against him. And so he was going to be tried by the Senate. And that never came to pass because Nixon counted the votes that he had for him, and he found at best like only 10 people were going to vote to against impeachment, which left 90 other votes, which clearly would have been enough to have impeached him. And the result was he resigned.
In the wake of everything that was happening, did it seem to affect daily life very much?
No. Daily life? No, not at all. I mean, it was confined to Washington, and Washington was in a frenzy. And the American people watched it every night on the television news, because newscasts were half an hour every night, and everybody watched them. Today, nobody watches the news because they have internet, and they get news from a whole variety of other sources. But newspapers and television were, the headlines were monstrous every day, and the articles in the papers were widely read, and people bought a lot more newspapers during this period of time than they ordinarily would, and more people watched television every night to watch the news than they ordinarily would. So the whole country was absolutely riveted with it, but daily life wasn't affected. It wasn't like 9/11, for example, which although it only affected New York, it disrupted a lot of things because there was no air travel for several days, and the stock market was closed for up to a week, and that affected a lot more people and a lot more people in the country than the Watergate did.
In the end, were you satisfied with the results of Nixon's resigning?
Well, I was deeply saddened. I mean, I thought that Nixon was had the opportunity to be a really great president, and one of the things that he did that was a watershed of his presidency, in which clearly could have only been done by somebody who was a Cold Warrior, so to speak, was opening up China, and it was done with great secrecy through channels that there were no leaks and nobody found out about it. And when Kissinger went and arranged for the trip, and all of a sudden it was announced that Nixon was going to go to China and normalize relations with the largest, the most populous people on the planet. And until that time, we had considered the Chinese in Formosa as being the rightful China, and it was a joke. They were like 1/50th the population of mainland China, and so it was a great feat, and Nixon also made a lot of headway with the Russians during his presidency. So it was a real shame. I felt very, very disappointed and saddened that he ended up the way he did.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, and